Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first meeting of New Year. Can I request everyone put your phone on silence, please? Any apology?
Chair, Councillor Marshall.
The late item to be introduced by the chair, there is one.
Chair, I just need to flag up for the record that the late item has not been publicised within 5 days in accordance with the 1972 Act, and therefore you would need to give permission under Section 100B if you're satisfied that there's a legitimate reason why it's late. You'd need to give permission for the late item to be put on the agenda for today.
Yes. So yeah, the late item that we're introducing, that you have got some copies of already, is around the Hackney Carriage and private hire licensing fees and charges. Now, you'll obviously be aware as members.
It's just at this stage to explain why it's late.
Okay. I beg your pardon. Yeah. So yeah, sorry. So yeah, the reason that this is late is because we've just really anticipated that because of some of the further changes to the licensing processes, we're not going to be in a position necessarily to calculate the fees and charges ready for introduction from April 2017, which is what we normally do. We didn't want to leave this decision, this paper, this information for you until the next scheduled committee meeting, because that is in March. So if we were asking you to consider not changing licensing fees and charges at that time, and you turned round and said no at the March meeting, we wouldn't have then had enough time to turn around a process to get some fees and charges considered for April. So we've felt we really had the need to bring the decision to you today as a late item, so that you can consider whether or not we want to, whether you want us to do some work on licensing fees and charges to amend them from April, or whether or not you'd be happy to leave that until a future date, which is what will be set out in the report, if you are happy for us to take it as a late item. Is that all right?
Just for clarification, Mike, in fact, the decision is not the full committee's, the decision is the chair's to make. So it depends on if the chair is persuaded by your representations.
Members, in accordance with Section 100, that will be 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, I have agreed to remit the following item on the grounds that it needs to be considered before the next meeting of the committee. Hackney Carriage and private hire licensing fees and charges from April 2017. And we will consider this before item 5. Any declaration of interest? No. Minutes of meeting held on 10th November and 16th November 2016. No. Thank you. Late item.
Chair,
Yeah. Sorry.
can I ask as a matter arising, I know we don't normally put them in there, but it's just that I'm interested in relation to the resolutions of that set of minutes, particularly that in relation to item 3, where representation should be made to the relevant ministers calling for an urgent, clear guidance on taxi licensing, following on from the KC recommendations. can I ask the officers whether or not we have actually had any communication from the respective government ministers, and if so, what is that information?
Chair, I'm not sure it's a question that should be properly directed to the officers. Not to be obstructive, simply because my understanding is that 2 letters went out, one from you directly as the chair, and I believe the other went from the Cabinet Member for Regulatory Services. My reasoning being, if they were signed and went out in both your names, then any responses should come directly to you both. So the officers will not know unless you share that information. I don't believe you shared that information with me or with any of the other officers. Yes, it may well be a question for the chair, at least, to answer in relation to the letter he sent out.
Well, in clarification then, Chair, have you had a reply?
No, Councillor Barker.
Yes, there are matters from that, if I may, when we come to item 5, I would like to raise some matters in relation to that we may well have to consider at some stage in relation to our future policies. In relation specifically to out-of-town taxes or whatever it is. So if you will bear with me when it comes to item 5, it's something that we may need to discuss or bring to the attention of the committee, but and obviously consider it in due course.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Mike? Late item.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, hopefully it'll become a little bit clearer. As I've sort of already started, as I'm sure you're all aware, the Hackney Carriage and Private Hire licensing fees and charges are reviewed regularly, generally on an annual basis to commence from the 1st of April to coincide with the financial year. Also, you'll know that these licensing functions are self-financing and non-profit making and must be set at a level to recover the total costs incurred in providing the service. So a number of significant changes have already been approved to Hackney Carriage and Private Hire licensing administrative processes and procedures, which will take effect from the 1st of July 2017. And a number of further changes to these administrative processes are currently being considered by a licensing committee. In fact, tonight, the next item on the agenda. The decisions of which will not be implemented until the 1st of July 2017 at the earliest. Now, the full costs involved with these changes are not yet known, so it's proposed with this report, Chair, that rather than reviewing the fees and charges from the 1st of April 2017 and then reviewing them again from the 1st of July 2017, that the current taxi licensing fees and charges remain in place until the 1st of July or until licensing committee make a further determination. So the recommendation is to approve that the current taxi licensing fees and charges that were set for 16-17 remain in force until the 1st of July 2017. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. Any question?
On that basis then, I assume that the eventual charges for the next year from April to April will be 4/12 up to July and then 8/12 beyond that because the new regulations will come in and therefore there'll be a higher workload.
Yeah, we've been through a similar process to this before. If you cast your mind back and you remember when the changes for driver's licences and operators' licences were extended from annual to 3 yearly. We as officers in the licensing team, but also officers within the finance teams who help us with all of this work, are now quite sort of conversant in how we sort of split the years and process the different costs involved with the relevant fees. So yes, there is a robust process that is set out for calculating them. Yeah.
All agreed with the recommendation? Somebody say, thank you. Item number 5, further change the taxi license.
Yeah, that's me again.
We are 11 recommendation on this, members. I propose we go one by one at a time. So instead of going all in one go, we go one by one. Mike will go through.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just going to sort of pick up on the point about the number of recommendations. So if I can just begin by saying that obviously at Council on the 23rd of November 2016, it was agreed to implement a new taxi licensing administration for the Council. And I'm sure you'll know that this included the introduction of a new penalty point system, as well as a minimum requirement application threshold. Also changes and modifications to certain current practices and housekeeping around the imposition of age limits and right to work legislation. And all that was agreed to be ready for introduction by the beginning of July 2017. As part of the recent review of the current practices, a number of other changes were considered. These were not integral to the implementation of the main proposals that were set out at the Council meeting in November, and it was agreed that those would be referred to Licensing Committee for determination. And it's these other changes that are set out in this report tonight. I wasn't intending to run through each of them separately, Chair, at this stage. I mean, I understand that members are going to wish to make comments on some or all of them, which may stimulate some further debate. What I was just going to point out was what you've just said, you know, that what we would like to do is to, on an individual basis, consider the merit in adopting as policy each of the proposals, and they're set out in the report in paragraphs 4.6 through to 4.20 of the report. Yeah. I was just going to then just read through the number of recommendations, Chair, but I suppose on the basis of whether or not you want to sort of take them sort of one by one, we can perhaps do it that way then.
Councillor Porter.
Chair, but perhaps before we move on to that, I understand what these items are that the officer is explaining, but when we discussed this at full council and in other discussions, there were a number of other potential changes that aren't included in here, which were discussed. Examples, we talked about the potential for looking for disability training, CCTV cameras, the age differences, driver ability tests, safeguarding within 3 months. There's a list of other things that were mentioned that don't appear here. At what point will those other items be discussed by this committee?
My understanding, Chair, is that they won't be or don't need to be because they have already now been approved by Council. So these items that you are considering this evening are those ones that were identified at Council that were to be sent to Licensing Committee to further discuss and agree a way forward on. I don't know whether or not I'm...
But Chair, we don't have any agreement or any proposals in relation to disability training, CCTV cameras, and we did discuss that these were potential policy changes that we needed to discuss to formalise a final, complete and robust licensing policy.
I mean, forgive me, Chair, I wasn't actually at the full council meeting on the 23rd of November. Hello.
Chair, I was at the full council meeting, and I also was at the licensing committee meeting that preceded it. And I think there might be an element of confusion about which meeting what was this, at which meeting what item was discussed. Mr. K is correct in saying that what you see in today's report is the residue of those matters which full council did not determine. I have a recollection, certainly in relation to the CCTV, that was discussed at the licensing committee meeting that preceded full council. I believe it may have been Councillor Ashburn or one of the other members who raised it. And I think we concluded that by saying that will be one of a number of additional representations which members will be able to make at full council should they feel they need to take them forward. Now, I don't recall CCTV being raised at full council subsequently.
Sorry, Chair. You may be right. It may have been the licensing meeting before full council, and certainly in other discussions we've had, I raised it there, and in my submission, we can't end up with a full and robust new policy in June or by July without having considered somewhere the rights and wrongs of that sort of thing. We talked at length about the type of policy changes that Rotherham had put into their report, and these are some of those. So we could deal with these tonight, but in my submission, either the committee or a working party, a cross-party working group of this committee needs to sit and consider all those other types of options to check their viability and whether or not they ought to be brought before the committee.
I absolutely agree with what you say. The one point I would make to distinguish those additional issues and what you have here before you is that, let's use the example of CCTV. That in itself, from whatever perspective we come to it from, would be, again, a significant change for the licensing trade, and they would need to be consulted on it. There has been no consultation on that. All of these issues here, however, have been consulted on. So we are clearly going to be some way behind in terms of the introduction. That said, as you rightly say, there is another meeting in March. Whether or not it's possible, as part of the overall package, to have a discussion about that and look to see how we can blend the two together so there's effective consultation and then a decision later on, but before 1st of July, certainly in the hands of you as members and the chair. But currently, there's no consultation on that because it's not a proposal that has been developed to any extent.
I understand that, Chair, but that just for me highlights the urgency of it. If we're going to have to do consultation, if we chose to recommend CCTV, it would have to go to consultation. That's time consuming. We'd need to try and do that by July. So I'm going to suggest either the chairs, the vice chairs, the chair and the vice chairs will look at these other aspects, or a cross-party working party to look at those other potential aspects before the March meeting, to come with some firm recommendations as to if there's anything else that we need to recommend and go out to consultation on.
Thank you, Councillor Poulter. Councillor Pike?
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Poulter, actually. It was discussed, CCTV. I too can't remember what meeting it was at, but it was definitely discussed, and I'll go with Councillor Poulter's recommendations, and that it goes to a subgroup or something like that to look at for the next meeting as soon as possible. If everybody's all right with that.
All agree?
Can we just clarify then, the subgroup that will be looking into those issues? Well, it's two things. One, can we be clear on what the issues are and just have a note made for the record? But two, the subgroup that's going to be looking at it, are you looking at a group? I think there were two options given: group of vice chair and vice chairs, which is 5 members, or a cross-party working group. The two are different. Which are we agreeing to is what I think I'm looking for clarity on.
Chair, if it helps, I've got a list of those that I made a note of that haven't been considered yet. Should we do that afterwards, if that's okay with you? Okay, well, off the top of my head, potential disability training for drivers in advance of the licence and for current drivers. CCTV cameras. I'd made a note, annual review of the DBS, but that's probably covered, is it? The age qualification. 21 to 18, or that's fully in there, is it? Okay. Driver tests then, driver ability tests, which some authorities do. Okay. Safeguarding training within 3 months. Let's go. Basic skills, English and maths is there. License. Those are probably the two main ones, those two outstanding ones then.
Of the proposal for the group, which were you proposing to be seconded? Is it the cross-party working group, or was it the chair and vice chairs?
Whichever the chair thought appropriate.
The chair or the recommendation has been made by Councillor Faulkner we could put that to the vote.
Chair, for me, it might be as well to have a cross-party because the vice chairs could well be tied up in committees or on, and they're the ones that we need to release for the meetings. So I would propose that we have a cross-party committee to look into it.
Chair, if it helps, I'm not a vice chair, so I wouldn't be involved in a vice chair subgroup. So you might want to make it cross-party. And the other one I've thought about that's not included, I think, is CabSafe, the CabSafe scheme.
Just for the record, all I said to the chair when you saw me lean across was to say to him that the precedent which has been set by a licensing committee historically is for cross-party working groups.
So we go for cross-party? Yep. Thank you. So, how was it for cross-party then?
Mike and then service system will arrange that.
Okay, so yes, what we're going to do then, I think we're going to start at 4.6 and just quickly run through each of the matters that are set out in the report for consideration. So 4.6. Yeah, well, 2.12 is one of the recommendations, so they will be included in 4.6 through to 4.20, yeah. Are we okay with that? Yeah. Okay, so 4.6 is around the revision of private hire operator condition 11A. This really is about a loophole that's a safeguarding loophole that we believe has been created with the current wording that's set out in condition 11A, subsection 12. What it actually does, currently it provides that bookings made by email or text are exempt from recording the picking up and setting down points of the journey and the name and address of the hirer. Closing off this loophole, in addition to the obvious safeguarding concerns that arise, will also protect the driver and operator from allegations of impropriety. And so the proposal set out in the report is to delete in its entirety condition 11A subsection 12. There is just a little, the last sentence in there just acknowledges the fact that for existing licence holders this will apply at the next licence renewal. So we're not able to make changes to operator licensing conditions mid-term, so that will apply from the next licensing renewal period. How do you want to make a decision about that now then, Chair? Okay.
All in favour? Thank you. Carried.
Right, thank you, Chair. So moving on to paragraph 4.7, online renewals of driver licences and private hire operator licences. Relatively straightforward here. Introduce an option to renew these types of licences online, benefits of which would be that the licence holders no longer be required to attend the council offices for renewal. The proposal is expected to drive efficiency by quickening the current administrative regime and potentially offer a lower online fee. So we're not saying that this is the only option that we're going to offer, the online. If people still want to come in and do it the traditional way, they can do. It's just an offer of an alternative option, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I did raise an issue when we had a pre-meet on this one, and that's obviously to be able to renew driving licences online, we need the software to be able to do that, particularly in relation to photographs and that sort of thing. Can I be assured by the officer that A, we will have that in place before we put this proposal into place, and B, is there an on-cost for it? Or C, have we got it already?
Yeah, we'd have to put those measures in place, Chair, yeah. Yeah. When you say cost to the authority, or... Yeah, it's more probably of a development issue more than a requirement to purchase online. I don't think it will be a big cost. No. I mean, as we've said in the report, hopefully. Yeah, well, we've got some systems and hardware already in place. I can't see this costing a significant amount of money to introduce. Well, yeah. We'll try our best.
No, thanks. All in favour? Thanks.
Yeah, so 4.8 is about MOTs for vehicles. So, currently, the way that it works is we issue vehicles with a certificate of compliance, which it isn't an MOT certificate per se. If a if a vehicle proprietor wants an MOT for their vehicle, as well as having the certificate of compliance that we issue as part of the process, there is an additional charge for that. What you'll know is that the approved testing stations that we have test our licensed vehicles on an annual basis. It's an MOT plus. So part of the test is the standard MOT test, but because we've introduced additional checks in terms of the supplementary testing manual, there are some other checks around, dimensions, internal dimensions, for example, boot literage and things like that will go over and above the MOT. So there's these extra checks that take place. So subject to a vehicle passing that test, it will be currently issued with a certificate of compliance. Now the problem with the certificate of compliance is that whilst we recognise it, it's not recognised by online insurance companies, the ability to be able to tax your vehicle online. The only checks that are made as part of those processes are against MOT certificates. So what this proposal is about, in a nutshell, is making the process slightly easier for the vehicle proprietors. We're not diluting any of the standards. What we are now saying is that rather than us issuing a vehicle compliance, a certificate of compliance, we will just ensure that the vehicle, when it goes for a test at one of the approved testing stations for its annual check, that it will be just given a vehicle compliance sheet. If the driver wants to have an MOT certificate at the same time, they will then still be required to pay the additional amount and receive that. But all we are doing is getting the vehicle compliance sheet off of the garage. So one of the things that we find is often that the annual test for the licensed vehicle isn't always the same as the MOT test. So say we have a licensed vehicle that's vehicle license is expiring today, it's booked in for a test today, it may well be that it had an MOT certificate issued for it 4 months ago and has still got so many more months on it to run. So it's not necessary for a vehicle to have an MOT certificate given to it at the same time as its annual licensed inspection. So that's why we're moving away from the certificate of compliance, but we're also leaving in place the option for the vehicle proprietor to ask the approved garage to issue it with an MOT.
Thanks, Mike. Any question? Yes.
Yes, it's an element of it, yes. Yeah. So if one of our licensed vehicles at its annual inspection passes the licensed vehicle test, by definition it will have also passed an MOT, because it will have had to achieve that as the minimum bit, and then obviously the plus bit as well. Now, the way it currently works is that if a proprietor wants an MOT certificate as well as getting the compliance sheet that he'll get from the garage for our purposes, then they will be able to obtain an MOT certificate if they want one. They'll have to pay an extra fee for that that's set out when we approve the fees and charges that the approved garages want to charge. It depends which garage you go to. Sometimes it's included in the price, sometimes it's an extra £10, sometimes it's an extra £20. It all depends which garage a vehicle proprietor goes and has the check done.
Thanks, Mike. All agreed? Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, 4.9 then on page 4. This is the disclosure and barring service checks. This is really about who countersigns the check, the form. Currently what happens is when a DBS check is required, the applicant fills the form in. It's a bit like a passport form or a driving licence application form. They fill the DBS check form in, providing all of the details that they're required to do. They then bring it in to the licensing team, who act as what we call a counter-signatory. So it's perhaps a bit similar to the post office counter-signing your passport application. It has to be, a DBS check has to be countersigned by an authorised organisation, what the Disclosure and Barring Service call a registered body, an umbrella body. So we're doing that at the moment. We charge an extra administrative fee for it, and we then send the DBS application form off. What we're proposing here in 4.9 essentially is for us to stop doing that, and for the individual applicants to decide where they want to take their their DBS application form 2 to be countersigned. There are a number of private organisations who can do it. They may be able to offer that service cheaper than we are. They may be able to do things online. It just offers a bit more flexibility for the applicant. And it also, as we've set out in the report, takes a little bit of the sting sometimes out of the relationship that we have with drivers, because as we know, DBS applications can take quite a significant time to be processed, depending on the time of year that they're submitted and the number of checks that need to be carried out on that individual. And often, as we've found, you know, we do get criticised by applicants because they feel that it's the council's lack of action that has delayed their DBS application from being determined. So there will be a benefit with you know, sort of removing us from that process. We don't receive a copy of the DBS the DBS form when it's returned now. The only copy goes back to the applicant, and so it's up to the applicant then to bring that DBS form that they've had into whoever they're bringing it into to be seen. So essentially that's the proposal is for us to stop doing the DBS checks and to require applicants now to take them to a private organisation of their choice to do. There is no dilution of the standards for an organisation to be able to countersign these DBS checks. They have to be registered with the DBS as an umbrella organisation, regardless of the fact whether they're a private organisation or not. DBS will only accept application forms from registered bodies. And so that's the proposal, Chair.
Right. Councillor Barker.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I had some concerns over this when I first read it, back when we were discussing it in the main paper. I've since been assured, and there's a sentence in there, that there are certified umbrella organisations by DBS. And so therefore, I think, I would hope it's incumbent upon us, in relation to the current practice that we have, we send out renewals for applications 3 months in advance. Can I ask whether it's the intention of officers to actually continue with that, because we know of the problems that there are with the delay in the DBS coming through? But secondly, are we also able to assist the drivers by giving them an approved list of organisations which are approved by DBS to, in actual fact, help them fill this particular form in? Because the last thing I want is for them to go to some fly-by-night. You can go onto the internet now and you get all sorts of people want to help you fill in a passport application, for example, and in actual fact they are not bona fide. And so therefore I think it's incumbent upon us, if we move to this system, to in actual fact offer them the range of approved DBS approved organisations that can give them this service.
Yeah, Chair, I mean, we are going to be very, very clear in the particular section of our guidance and application pack, because the other thing that we will have to make sure they do is check the right boxes on the DBS application form, so the right level of search and check is undertaken. So they will be under no doubt whatsoever what level of check is required, that they will then check with the organisation they ask for. In terms of a list of registered bodies, my understanding is that there is an up-to-date maintained list on the DBS's website. So one of the problems that we have is in producing a list.
Chair, can I just, as this conversation has progressed, I've realised I do run a registered umbrella body, so I just wanted to put that on record. So,
Thanks.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the problems with us producing a list is that it very, very quickly potentially goes out of date, you know, because there are probably more registered bodies being approved, some are falling off the list, some are coming on. So what we'd probably prefer to do is just to point people in the direction of the DBS website where they can go at any point and find an up-to-date list of registered umbrella bodies that can carry out that check.
Councillor Jackson.
Thank you. This question of DBS clearance has always been a bit fraught, actually, one way or another. And we're told that, yes, there are delays, considerable delays, which raises all sorts of difficulties for the drivers. Now, my experience is mine went in on the Thursday. On the Friday morning, I'd got my clearance. So it leads me to believe that if there are delays, there is a reason for the delay. And I just wonder if we ought to have really the control over this. I mean, I understand what you're saying, that other bodies, they can be directed to other bodies. I'm just wondering whether it's something that ought to stay with us.
Well, you know, it is different. I mean, we've experienced, you know, exactly the same point that I think you're making, you know, is that some drivers have come to us in the past and we've countersigned their application and they have been returned very, very quickly. You know, others aren't. I mean, the point that you make, I think, is right. You know, the length of time that it takes to get a DBS back often relates to the checks that either the DBS service or the local police are making. Now, that really, it doesn't matter whether or not we're countersigning the application forms or whether or not that's going to a private organisation. You know, the check will be the check, and the time that it takes to process that check will be the time it takes, whether or not it's done by us or whether it's done by a private registered body.
Councillor Khan.
I think the counter-signing of the application is a good idea that these other organizations can counter-sign. They wrote, some of them already do it. Yeah, so that takes the pressure off the council. But I think you'll still get drivers coming to the council and you'll be signposting them from the beginning. Yeah, so I think, yeah, why not? They can get a countersign from other organizations which do passports and everything. And where the council is concerned, when they bring the copy in of the DBS, yeah, that's what the council wants.
I mean, of course, what we also do, which is probably not a consideration for the meeting tonight, but obviously it is a requirement now for all of our for all of our licensed drivers. Once they've had a DBS check, they are required to sign up to the online update service. We've not mentioned that in the paperwork because that's already a process that's approved. So, of course, within the guidance notes, with the application pack, as well as obviously information about what levels of check, you know, they need to undertake, where they can go to in terms of the DBS website, we'll also be providing information in there that says, and of course, you need to sign up to the online. Now, once we've got that information, we can then go on and once we've seen a copy of the DBS that they've brought in, we are then able to check to see whether or not any of that individual circumstances has changed. So there's a couple of there's a number of sort of checks in the process to ensure that we keep on top of people's DBS status.
Thanks, Mike. All in favour?
Sorry, Chair, before you move,
I'll move on to the next.
Let's pick up the point about the operators.
Yeah.
You want to do the same point?
Well, there's two paragraphs in this section. 4.9 is about us moving the DBS checks to private umbrella bodies. 4.10, and there's a separate recommendation about this in the recommendations, is that obviously, you know, we check drivers' DBS. What we don't do is check private hire operators. You know, so what the paragraph 4.10 is around is the proposal that we introduce a requirement for all private hire operator licence applicants and directors of the companies will be required to undertake an enhanced DBS check. So we're almost bringing in a requirement now, as well as drivers, for private hire operators.
Chair, just on that one, that refers to the operators themselves and directors. There is an argument, and it's done in other authorities, whereby even the controllers have to be DBS checked, because ultimately they are guiding taxi drivers, and they could abuse the system to their own ends as well. So controllers, for me, should be included.
Agree with you, Councillor Poulter. That should be included. All in favour of recommendation 4.9 and 4.10? All agreed?
With the addition
With
of
the
Councillor
adding
Poulter's
recommendation, yes.
Yeah.
Amended recommendation on item 10.
On an issue, did we consult on?
We did, I think. We did. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I mean, I don't know whether or not there are any legal implications for controllers, because in theory, are controllers employees of the private hire operating company? Now, I don't know, I'll probably look to Olu for some advice here, because whether or not the duty to make that decision on controllers falls to the operator, I don't know.
Yeah, they may be employed by the, whether they are or not, to be quite honest with you, they're the ones who will be taking the phone calls, and they're the ones who will be directing the vehicles to wherever they need to go. So I do think that they should be brought into it, whether they're self-employed or employed by the operators.
I understand your concern. I just flagging up the potential issue about us approving something that actually it turns out perhaps to be legally incorrect later on down the line. There may be a way around it that we perhaps need to explore. I don't know.
Chair, if it helps, I think other authorities are doing it, so there must be a way to do it.
Chair, I'm sure there will be a way to do it. The starting point is this: who does the law say we need to be satisfied is a fit and proper person? And as things stand, the 76 Act says a driver and an operator needs to be a fit and proper person. Now, it is true that in the majority of cases, the operator will be the controlling mind of the entity. The question, I guess, is around whether or not it would be legitimate to introduce a private hire operator condition, which would oblige them if the operator is not. So if is not the operator, yes, to ensure that whoever they leave in control is also DBS checked. Certainly, if we can work around some loose wording that will allow the officers to go away to explore the lawfulness of that, then I'm comfortable with that. Whether we can actually do it right now, it's something which I'd need to just be satisfied about myself. I know other authorities who do it, as you say, but then I know a lot of authorities who have things in place and they're not exactly lawful.
Thanks, Olu. Councillor Barker?
Yes, I mean, I'd not thought of this one before until Chris has just brought it up, but there is some logic to it, isn't there? Because, I mean, basically, you've got a controller there who is receiving phone calls on behalf of the company. It could be a lone female. They're actually obtaining data from that female putting it down, hairdressers, etc., etc. It just follows that to protect the person hiring the cab, the controller should be subject to the same rigours as a driver and or an operator. It's got to be right, doesn't it?
And hence, like I say, Councillor Buck, I don't disagree with the principle of it at all. It's just one of those things which perhaps we just need to satisfy ourselves better about the basis around the principle. And if we can legitimise it, then it's something we can do. Perhaps it's one, again, to put onto the list for the cross-party working group, to give the officers the time to carry out the research, to refine it, and then see whether it's something which can be introduced.
Councillor Hedgley.
Just on this issue, we don't know, do we, I suppose, offhand, whether the operator has a duty to DBS check all his staff who actually contact drivers and customers?
There's no obligation on the operator to do that in the 1976 Act now. Right. The obligation in the 1976 Act is for the operator to be fit and proper, just like it is for a driver to be fit and proper. And the way in which that transposes into practice is by undertaking the DBS check.
So maybe it would be a good idea to refer this to the working party with a view to us finding the way to adopt this.
All agreed? Thank you.
That's recommendations 2.4 and 2.5 moved,
yep,
with a sub-recommendation to add that onto the act.
Okay, thank you. So if we move on then to the top of page 5, I think on my paper, is paragraph 411. And this is about dual badges for drivers. So you'll see there that we sort of currently acknowledge that we don't issue a dual badge, but we do issue separate Hackney carriage driver's licences and private hire driver's licences to a small number of individuals. Which sort of set out in there the benefit of introducing a dual badge option. It'll increase flexibility by allowing an individual to undertake both types of licence work, so Hackney carriage work and private hire work. But obviously, you know, in order to obtain a dual badge, an applicant would need to satisfy certain requirements, and ultimately that is the requirement that we've currently got in place to obtain a Hackney carriage driver's licence. Because again, I'm sure you'll remember, because this is the issue that we've had with out of town vehicles. You get licensed as a Hackney carriage driver, and you're driving a Hackney carriage vehicle. You can then go and undertake private hire work in other parts of the country. So in order for a private hire driver to get a dual badge to do Hackney carriage and private hire work, they would effectively have to achieve the Hackney carriage driver standard. So what we're essentially saying here, and it has just changed ever so slightly since we wrote the report, is that we think there's probably an opportunity here for a 2-badge option. You get a dual badge, which can allow you to undertake Hackney carriage and private hire driving work, or you just elect to go for a private hire driver's badge option. So for those people who don't want to do Hackney carriage work, we still give them the option to just go for the private hire driver's badge. But then the other option is a dual badge, because in effect that is the Hackney carriage driver test. So that's the proposal for this particular section.
Councillor Pegg.
Yeah, I do have a few concerns over this. We're trying to cut down on out-of-towners coming into Derby. This will open it up for Hackney drivers, our drivers, to go into other areas, won't it? Am I right on that?
Well, there's nothing to stop our Hackney carriage drivers going off to work in Gedling as private hire drivers now. because they could use the same facility in the legislation to be able to do that. All I guess we'd be doing is well, no, because currently our Hackney carriage drivers, if they want to, they could sign themselves up to any of our private hire operators now. So I'm a Hackney carriage driver. If I want to, I can go on the books of Chads or Westerns or Albatross or PJs, whatever, and do private hire work. So, no, we're not. We're making it more We're not really making it more flexible for them because they can already undertake private hire work.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I see what you're saying now. To me, I just thought it was opening it up even further to this, and I was just going to say probably it's something that as another one for the working group, perhaps to look at putting a mileage distance or whatever the case may be on where they're allowed to operate outside the city on, if we went along those lines. But, I know that, is it Rosendale, they're now turning around saying that their drivers can no longer go more than 30 miles outside of their area or whatever the case may be. And if we want to tighten up on this sort of thing, it's perhaps something that we ought to be working alongside and to implement. It's just a thought.
If it helps, just to hopefully give some understanding around that, the case which opened up the floodgates was very clear in saying that it's up to the discretion of every licensing authority to ask drivers at the point at which they come for a license whether they intend to trade predominantly within the licensed area of the council granting them a license or wider. And if that council then has a policy in place supported by evidence which precludes which would preclude it from issuing drivers who want to trade outside of its area with a Hackney badge, they can do so. So the operative words are the evidence, and that's the problem we would have with Derby, because in Derby, the issue we have here is the complete opposite. We don't have a history, so no evidence of our drivers going to trade outside of Derby. What we have is a history of drivers from elsewhere coming into Derby to trade. So even if we try to go for a policy to say our drivers shouldn't go out, we don't have the evidence to justify it, and so if we were challenged, we'd have an issue. But the case law is there to support it if we have the evidence.
Councillor Bitry.
I think Ollie's just answered my question, actually. So basically, the whole purpose of this is just to get the evidence, just to get more information so eventually we can crack this problem.
Well, it could do.
Because at the moment, until you said that, I didn't see the point of this, but that makes a bit of sense now. Thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Yes, I thought I understood this. I'm fully conversant with the fact that Hackney carriage drivers can opt to, in actual fact, be private hire. No problem with that, and that's quite reasonable because Hackney can only operate within its licensed area. But of course, if it takes a run, if it's a Derby car, and takes a run to Manchester Airport, for the purpose, once it goes out to the Derby area, it becomes, to all intents and purposes, private hire. I can understand that. All this will do, in actual fact, is give the opportunity for private hire drivers in Derby to obtain a Hackney licence. That's all this will do. Because, as you quite rightly say, Hackney already can act as private hire if they so wish. Can't we? So, all we're doing here is giving the opportunity for private, and I don't know whether or not we need that, to be quite honest, because it'll put the yellow cabs up in arms, I'll tell you that, you know. I mean, there's normally war and peace anyway between them. All we're doing is, in actual fact, if you've got a private hire licence, you're turning around and saying, if you want a dual licence, you come up to a Hackney standard, and you can be a Hackney as well.
No, that's not what it's saying, Councillor Barker, because the key point is that the driver is then licensed to drive a private hire vehicle and a Hackney carriage vehicle. But if all they have is a private hire vehicle, they can't use it to do Hackney carriage work, because that vehicle is only licensed as a private hire vehicle.
Councillor Keith?
I was going to ask a similar thing, really, to Councillor Barker regarding, but I was going to put it another. I was going to ask what, and I think Olu might have just covered it now. What is the advantage to a private hire having a dual bag? I can see it from the other side, because he can get one anyway. If it's a private hire, he's only got to apply for a Hackney carriage. I mean, and get it. So, I mean, what's the advantage for a private hire driver to have a dual badge?
The only advantage, really, for the trade from that perspective is that they don't have to pay for 2 licenses. That's what it is. They get 1 license which allows them to do both. Currently, if they wanted to do both, they'd have to pay for a separate Hackney carriage license and a separate private hire license, and that's the issue. So it's something which, again, they have advocated for, and from the officer perspective, we don't believe that there's anything necessarily contentious in the request.
No. But they'll get a charge more anyway for a dual badge than they would for a single badge.
Obviously, the calculations haven't been made just yet, and that's one of the reasons why the late item report came through. But all the indications are that whatever fee is going to be charged for the dual badge will certainly be less than what it costs to get 2 separate badges.
Councillor Khan?
Can I say that this was part of the consultation, and we should have a feedback here from the drivers that they on dual badges, so that percentage should be there. So how many drivers from the consultation say they wanted a dual badge?
Yes, I think from what I can see here, it was entry number 16 on the printouts from the consultation. 53% of license holders were in favor, as were 64% of local residents and businesses, combining together to be an overall majority in favor of 57.2%.
Thank you, Chair. 4.12, basic skills test. So we've already mentioned the mandatory safeguarding training. So that was agreed at Council on the 23rd of November. So we are in the process of working up some procedures around that. But we also talked about the introduction of a basic skills test, to extend, related to and extend on from that mandatory safeguarding training. The basic skills test revolve around something called functional assessments. It's a recognised test in terms of being recognised by a number of different training and development organisations that offer it out. The proposal is to include maths, English and ICT. And you can see there for the middle sentence of 4.12 there, it's all around improving standards for all drivers, improving customer service and ensuring continued public safety. The proposal is that for new applicants, they will have to have obtained a level 1 qualification, functional skills assessment in Maths, English and ICT. For existing drivers, the proposal is for this to be completed before the next renewal of their driver's licence. And that very, very last sentence there talks about, you know, the subject to what members feel tonight and what decision they make. It's the intention to try and identify a number of different options around who could actually and how the test would be delivered. Whether or not we'd go out to a local college or a training provider to do that for us, or whether or not we would acquire the ability to be able to run it as an in-house online facility. I don't think we're not too worried about members making a decision on how we deliver it at this stage. It's just a debate about whether or not you want to introduce it as a requirement and whether or not you want to introduce it for all new drivers and or and I suppose for existing drivers too.
Well, I'm not in favor of bringing in a house. If we bring in a house, it can cost more and will cause a lot of tension inside between officers and drivers. So I would be proposing not bringing in a house. We should go for local college or training provider. I don't see any logic bringing in in-house.
Chair, my understanding is we don't need to decide that at this stage. We're just deciding the principle of whether we want it or not, and as the officers can come back with their proposals, the best way of making the course available.
That's correct, Councillor Bolton.
I'm not in favor of saying existing drivers have to do these tests before their next renewal. They already done an NVQ test, they already done an BTEC. We should give them some time, not just say somebody in, say, next July, August, he's no renewal and he have to pass this test. So we got to be careful on here. What we're doing for the existing drivers, it's not fair on them. Yes, new drivers, they have to do that.
Chair, for me, most of the licence holders are on 3-year licences now, and I don't think it's unreasonable for them to have to do this before 3 years is up.
No, all of them in Constable, not yet. No, all the drivers got 3 years. Some of them are new yet. There's some more new. The last year they did it on 2016. Some of them on that time they had 2 years last running. So some of them will be renewing in the future. Councillor Hazelgrave.
You're quite right, Councillor Hazelgrave, to point out entry number 10 from their consultation, and the fact that that relates to the proposal so far as it relates to new applicants. Entry number 11 was then the follow-on, which relates to its introduction for existing drivers. And I don't know, in having picked up the statistics on the first, whether or not you want to pick up on the second as well.
Councillor Heriga, are you proposing that? Yeah. Yeah. So
Chair, for
somebody
me,
second that?
Chair, I could go with that. Maybe we need to decide a lead-in time. Maybe that could be 6 months. You know, if you again, maybe the working party could look at a lead-in time.
Can I, before you do just talk about lead-in time, I think it'd be useful just to clarify the position of where we're at in terms of driver licences. So we do have a few drivers who have only got 1 year licences still. But of course, the vast majority of our drivers will have renewed for 3 years. Now, they will have started applying for their 3-year licences back in October 15. So conceivably, we could have had some drivers who have had their 3-year driver's badges for over 12 months. So they do actually have less than 2 years to run on their licences. But as I say, I just thought it'd be useful to clarify that.
Councillor Khan?
The way we understand it, Chair, is that the MVQ test doesn't necessarily cover these skills. I understand Councillor Khan's sort of comments. You know, there is the possibility. I don't think you don't necessarily have to undertake all 3 functional skills assessments. So, you know, if the view was that you didn't feel the ICT one was particularly relevant, then I'm guessing that you could quite easily stipulate that it was a level 1 functional skills assessment in a particular field. There are also a number of different levels as well. You know, level 1 is not the base level for the functional skills assessment. There are 3 entry level assessments as well. So the way it works is, I understand it's entry 1, entry 2, entry 3, then it goes on to level 1, sort of as a level of tests. There's also a level 2 as well. So I think the level 1 basic skills tests in these functional areas, I think came from some correspondence that we had from Rossendale actually. Some time ago, and it was, if memory serves me right, I think it was a discussion that we had at a previous licensing committee that if Rossendale were looking at introducing this, perhaps we ought to go out to consultation and consider it too, which is what we've done. So there are a couple of options I think to think about in terms of basic skills test, and it may well be that perhaps this is an area that we could consider taking to a cross-party working group for further consideration. Yeah.
Councillor Jackson?
Well, I think anything that drives up standards is to be applauded, and that's what we want, high standards. And I mean, in the next one, 4.13, which we're going to discuss, dress code is driving up standards, and what's wrong with that? They're not tremendous standards to attain. I mean, we're not talking about degrees, just standards for when people are dealing with the public.
Councillor Keith?
Oh, thanks. I've had my hand up for ages and everybody's jumping in. Most of the stuff's been said now, but... No, but what I really think is that we should definitely welcome this, and the devil will be in the detail, and that will be to come. But I do think this is one of the things that will drive up standards. And we just, like I say, the devil will be in the detail. And I think it should be unanimous decision this, that we put this forward. Sorry.
Councillor Barker?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We've debated around this chamber on several occasions, particularly going back to the out-of-town issues in relation to whether or not those drivers meet the same standards as we require within Derby. I think that it's incumbent upon us, if we know of other authorities that are actually putting these standards into place, it's incumbent upon us to try and match the standards from elsewhere, because otherwise others will be saying it about us. When it comes to Maths, English and ICT, I think most of us have sat on panels within this building whereby there has been some complaint from a member of the public or whatever relating to either being overcharged, taking them the long way round, fiddling with the data head in the vehicle or whatever it is. I accept that some of the issues relating to it, maths, what standard, I mean, I don't know what level 1 means. I mean, is it 1 + 1 = 2? I don't know. I mean, what standards are they? But there are instances where you do get drivers themselves argue the fact that, well, I made that mistake because I misunderstood in the instructions that the customer gave me, or, well, that was a mistake, I added it up in my head and multiplied it by 10 and got the wrong figure. ICT, we've just said that we want to incorporate a place where somebody's picked up, a place where somebody's dropped off, etc., etc. To do that, you need ICT. And so, therefore, they are all pertinent. They've got to be pertinent. But I say, I mean, all I'm concerned about is what level it's at. I mean, we don't need brain surgeons, do we? You know, at the end of the day.
Councillor Khan, the last speaker on this issue.
Yeah, can I also say standard? Yeah, can I also standard? I'm all for standards, yeah? But standard, then you need customer service, yeah? So what I'm saying is, I think where math is concerned, there's a meter, okay, the distance is taken, whatever, that's different, but there's a meter that the standard charge they charge and that meter works out, and where a customer can see that how much is being charged, yeah? So the standard, I'm all for it, but I think then we get people from Derby going to other towns like Rosendale and Gedling and getting a license from there and driving in Derby, and they live in Derby. Yeah? So that also, I think we need to be considering, that we have also be taken into account some of the drivers that live in Derby and go out of Derby and get a license and drive in Derby. What about the standards for them? We can't impose standards on them because they're drivers from the outside.
You're the last one, Councillor Bitwi.
haven't got a license. I think level 1 functional skills is pretty much, you know, it's just a basic level of competence, I think. I don't think it's rocket science in any way. But I do also share your concern about, and I think we should do it. I must admit, I do think we should impose this for new drivers, and, you know, in time when the 3-year people come up to renew, I think we should do it for them as well. But I think we should just be prepared, as Councillor Khan says, that it will, you know, add to the out-of-towners, you know, the people who can't pass our tests, go into Gedling, go into Rossendale. But, you know, I think if it's right for Derby, we should do it, with some reservations.
Thank you. Those in favour of recommendation, hold on, amended by Councillor Hazel Graves. Did somebody second or just?
I made a recommendation. I don't know if you seconded it. I think it was on the issue of...
Or give us some time, yeah.
We agreed to it for the new applicants, existing drivers, that they give some leading time to a fair leading time, so that, you know, it's not sprung on when they go through either their license, they've got some time provided to it, and they can actually obtain those qualifications clearly prior to the application. So that's fine.
Yeah.
Happy to second it.
You second. Those in favour of our amended recommendation? Who agreed? Thus carried with the amended recommendation.
Are we actually agreeing a lead-in time tonight, or is that something that we discuss a working party? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
2.8.
Yeah. 413 is the next one. Dress code. Councillor Jackson has already mentioned this. So yeah, I mean, essentially, some of the preamble to this is, as Councillor Jackson has said, about driving up standards, reinforcing a positive professional image of drivers, who are often the first point of contact with visitors to the city. We did seek the introduction of a mandatory dress code was sought as part of the consultation exercise, and the intention really of this was just to sort of generate a bit of sensible debate about the appropriateness of what, if anything, we introduce, or maybe about what we look or seek to, I suppose, for want of a better word, you know, ban. You know, is this about setting a particular dress code in terms of stipulating what people actually wear or what they don't wear, essentially. There's also a sentence in 413 there about committee maybe wanting to consider encouraging individual drivers or employers of the drivers or trade associations to be a bit more proactive in considering the merits of introducing a voluntary code. So there's a couple of options that I think we've set out in terms of you know, what members might want to have a bit of a debate about. The recommendation or the proposal is not specific in this particular regard. What we're just asking you to do is to you know, consider introducing a specific dress code requirement to be determined by yourselves. Thank you.
Councillor Pegg?
Yeah, I agree with this. I think that if we try to come up and enforce some sort of dress code on them, we'll have a battle royal on our hands. I think it might be prudent, if you like, to get the trade to sit down as well and look at it and give them maybe a time scale to come up with a dress code. I think that is probably the best way, because then it saves the officers getting involved, this committee getting involved. We're putting the recommendation forward, and it's up to them then to come up with something, say within 6 months, that we can all agree on.
Thank you. Councillor Barker?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I'll just add to that, actually. I think this is a very good idea, but I think, as Councillor Pegg quite rightly says, if we try and impose something direct from here with the trade, be it Hackney or private hire, we will have a battle royal. I think this is something that really can be taken to the trade meetings. I, for one, was in Lincoln a few weeks ago, and Lincoln has got a mixture, again, of Hackney and also private hire vehicles. And they have a corporate shirt dependent upon the company. Now, that's not beyond, I don't think, the corporate bodies within Derby to in actual fact come up with something like that. In other words, this one company got a yellow shirt, there was another company got a sort of off-green shirt, there's another one wear a white shirt. I mean, I think we've all been in here when we've seen Gary come from Chad Cars. He always wears a blue shirt with Chad Cars on it. Now, that's pride in the brand. I know with Hackneys, there's a lot of Hackney carriages which are privately owned Hackney carriages, but they all run under a data head for 7.5s or whoever it is. And so there's nothing to stop 7.5s in actual fact having that corporate identity. And it gives the public, again, some confidence in relation to the fact that driver behind that vehicle is a Derby driver and has been gone through the normal checks, because he's not only wearing his badge, he's also wearing a readily identifiable shirt from 7.5 taxis or from Chad Cars or from whoever. It's got to be the way forward, but I think this is something we can put back to the trade and sell it to them to in actual fact come up with an idea themselves to give some corporate identity to their specific company.
Councillor Jackson?
As an authority, we like to think that we have high standards as far as taxi licensing is concerned. That's why we don't like people disappearing off to Rossendale and Gedling. And this just enhances the image that we are an authority that takes life very seriously, and we have high standards in this authority.
Councillor Porter?
Chair, I was in Lincoln not so long ago and saw it. You probably already mentioned this, have you? But it was impressive to me to know there was a taxi rank, but it identified who the drivers were in that rank, and it gave a definite corporate impression. But I also want to raise that the consultation, number 19 in the consultation, and worryingly for me, 66% of let me get it right. 71% of licence holders disagreed with it. Are we going to get buy-in from the drivers if we give them the option to tidy themselves up, or do we need to come up with some form of non-too prescriptive code? But and likewise, in relation to this, the public were well in favour of it, I believe. 62 or 94 was it? No, 62%. So my worry is if we leave it to the operators and the drivers, whether we will get any level of consistency.
Councillor Ashwarman?
Thank you. I was going to point out 19 was the question and the results, as you've just said. Secondly, I think that we need to get cooperation from the industry, and comments have been made along those lines. And the third item, having seen a dress code complete debacle before I came in, which was specified by a company which I worked for. No, not in Lincoln, worldwide, but it was a right mess. So that it's very easy to get dress codes wrong. So we need to get the industry involved. Thank you.
Councillor Hazelgrave?
Chair, as a teacher, I had the daily job and lesson by lesson job of trying to make sure that uniform standards in the school I worked in were enforced, and it took up time, a lot of effort. It wasn't consistently administered by all the teachers, so therefore there was some areas where it was not as not observed, shall we say, to the full extent. And the issue is, of course, that we've got 71.9% of respondents, and I would have thought that would be the respondents from the drivers saying they wouldn't be in favour of it. I would have thought that would reflect a fairly uniform opposition to it. If we do want to get them on our side on this, and it will require cooperation, because we don't have the time or the staff to go around checking on people's uniforms, we need to get some consensus from the trade, maybe what Councillor Barker suggested, trying to get operators, trying to encourage operators to do it, and maybe you get a majority of drivers and the other drivers would like to fall in line because they then all look the same. And when somebody actually feels, okay, it's all right, they're getting better trade than me, they're not getting the funny looks I'm getting when I turn up scruffy. I think we could go down the route also of looking at what we would not want, and we could impose that. So drivers wearing hoodies, to my mind, is something we could say we don't like because it's not a good image for the city, and we've got a kind of rationale for that. That's all I'd like to say on the issue, I think.
Could I just, with your permission, say something, please? And it's part of what Councillor Hazelgrave has just said now, which Mr. Kay also stated at the outset. If you permit me some leverage, if I can call them dress code light and dress code major, there's two ways to look at this. One is dress code light. So what don't we want to see? We don't want to see drivers in perhaps vests, hoodies, baseball caps, or whatever. That's one route you could go down and prescribe, and that then becomes the dress code. Or you could go dress code major, again, forgive me, my own terminology, where you will say you have to wear a collared shirt and a trouser or skirt or what have you. You're all right in what you say. Certainly, based on the consultation responses, this is unlikely to find favour. And so you have to ask yourself two things. One, do you go to the trade and say to the trade, you come up with a proposal? But what do you do if the trade don't come up with a proposal? And do you therefore give an indication when you go to the trade saying, if you don't, come back to us within 3 months, 6 months, whatever the period is that you stipulate, we are minded to introduce dress code light or dress code major, as the case may be. Just some thoughts in terms of trying to focus the discussions to get this moving on.
I think what we should do, if we want to leave this to trade, we should recommend to trade, look, we want a shirt or trouser or skirt, right? Then ask them to decide if they want to put their badge on or their different colors, that's up to them. So at least they can say, well, look, we want somebody want yellow, somebody want blue. They can have what they got to have. We have to decide what we're going for, shirt, trouser, or just like Olu said, we don't want a hoodie, we don't want a t-shirt. So we have to decide that before we go back to trade. Then we can put them to, look, this is what we say is suggesting. You come up with your solution, you want different colors, or you got to be all one color.
Chair, I was just going to ask whether there was any code for teachers. In my previous profession, we had 100% uniform compliance.
Councillor Khan?
I just want to, I don't know, ask Mike, have we got any samples or examples from other towns that have introduced dress codes that...
Yeah, Sandra's just said that we did have. I don't think we've done a whole scale review. We've just got the odd one or two examples of different local authorities and their requirements. And I think one that comes to mind that Sandra's just mentioned is Renfrewshire. Can you remember what they...
It's really
That was really quite strict. That was shirt.
shirts, ties.
Yeah.
Councillor Forget.
I haven't spoken yet tonight, so I'm going to. I agree with Barbara. Anything that pushes up, you know, the taxi licensing, the actual looks of, you know, the drivers and that is good. What I'd like to say is that we put it through for the dress code and then take it to the cross-party to decide on whether it's polo shirts or shirts, and then talk to the actual licensing trades. I mean, when you're sitting in a car for 8 hours a day, you don't want to be stuck in a shirt, especially in the summer. If you've got polo shirt on, it's air-tech so you can breathe. You know what I mean? So really, cross-party, have a discussion, and just see which way the trade want to go.
Councillor Holmes.
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Froggatt on what she said on that. I do also feel we should issue a banned list. You mentioned the hoodie. I remember having a taxi all the way home one night with a driver who had his hood up on his hoodie. He never turned round, and you don't think about it at the time, but he could have been anybody. He you know, so I feel it's quite important to have not just a dress code, but things that should be banned as well.
Councillor Hazleray. Councillor Holmes.
Sorry, what I was meaning was, for instance, we could say a shirt and tie, not a shirt and trousers, and then they could say wear a hoodie over the top of that because they were cold, for instance. That's all I meant by having a banned item.
Councillor Holmes, they can't have a shirt and a hoodie on top. So they can't do that. That's what we're trying to implement. We're going to take the hoodies away. So we have to ban hoodies. We have to ban T-shirts. So we have to come up with something solution here to the proposal. What are you proposing now? Can somebody propose something?
I think there was a...
This is no big issue. We're not going to leave everything to the working party.
Well, I think it does require some thought.
But I know
They're consulted
Councillor Pluckett?
Yeah, the risk of...
Yeah.
Councillor Barker, I thought you said...
Can I propose that we vote on the 4.13 to put it through, but we also send it to the cross-party for a full discussion and to also discuss it with the licensing trade before anything is put forward?
Second that? Okay. All in favour? Yeah.
Okay. 414 then is about vehicle proprietorship. Relatively straightforward this one is. We've had some issues in the... Now this one will be straightforward. I've not got anything to throw at you. So we have some issues in the past with different ways, different people prove that vehicles have changed hands. What we want to do is we want to introduce a mandatory notification form that what we're asking is to be approved, so that must be completed fully and submitted to us to prove the transfer of a vehicle and vehicle proprietorship. So we're moving away from V5 documentation, we're moving away from sort of receipts and things like that. We've come up with a notification form that's been used by another authority that we've taken on board, and that will be the one form that we will accept.
Ashwarna?
In 415, hopefully the form will be both paper and electronic.
Well, we can make it electronic to be filled in, and we can. There may well be a requirement. Is there some requirement on the form for some other documentation that they need to provide?
Yeah.
Right. It may not be able to be emailed in. We can certainly put it online so that people can fill it in electronically, but they would probably then have to print it off and bring it in with some other documentation. But it's a standard form with a standard layout that will need to be completed in all circumstances. So 416 is about vehicle modifications, and this is really about existing licensed vehicles. You'll see there from the information we've provided that committee have already agreed that modified vehicles applying for a new licence must have this Viva assessment undertaken, a voluntary individual vehicle assessment undertaken. That's a certificate that's issued by the DVSA. So that's already in place and has been agreed by committee in terms of new licences. What this proposal is about is it will be applied to all currently licensed vehicles at their next renewal. Or alternatively, members could determine that they want to apply the Viva process to existing licensed vehicles immediately. So there'll be a requirement there that existing licensed vehicles will need to get a Viva undertaken straight away. So there's a couple of options with this particular matter, Chair.
Chair, just before you hand this to the floor for discussion, it's worthwhile putting cards on the table and saying this may well be controversial with existing license holders who have vehicles that have been modified but which haven't been through the Viva. And I think it's only fair to alert members to that. That's not to scare you, so you don't make a decision that's appropriate or what, but to let you know that's where we are. Because fundamentally what we're talking about here is public safety. And from the officer perspective, my understanding is that they only became aware of the Viva process late last year, which is when it was introduced for new vehicles. But the issue is this, that there are modified vehicles out there where it's uncertain what standard of integrity the modifications have been carried out to. When a vehicle is built on a production line, the mounting points, for example, of seats and seat belts are subject to additional strengthening to make sure that they can take loads and cope with accidents and shunts from every direction, etc., etc. With some of these modified vehicles, what you then find is standard seating would have been taken out and realigned, seat belts may have been taken out and realigned. And the issue is that from a public safety perspective, officers cannot say with any degree of certainty whether or not those reinstallations have been done safely. The only way they can say that with any degree of certainty is to put them through a Viva test, which is what was accepted for new vehicles back end of last year. But you now have this issue that you have a number of vehicles out there currently licensed that may not meet the Viva standard. So you should expect that if you approve this, the trade will complain about it, but you need to be aware of that. But that's not to say that you necessarily buckle in relation to that, because put simply, it's a public safety point.
Councillor Hedelgrave.
Is there any evidence at present that these vehicles that haven't had this Viva subscription have actually been involved in accidents which compromise the safety of their passengers? Or just don't we know?
No, I think it's just that we don't know. So, I mean, a good example, as we've set out in the paragraph, relates to modifications to seating layouts, for example. So you'll get a minibus type vehicle that's come off the production line from Vauxhall or Renault or wherever, that's got like a traditional layout of seats. And then what's happened is all those seats have been taken out, and some of them have been turned around to face, you know, backwards up against the front passenger seats. So the internal dimensions of layout have been changed. So as Olu says, we're not entirely sure, because a lot of this is underneath the floor, hidden by carpet, or whether or not those seats have been fixed or fastened to a proper structure within the vehicle. Whether or not the seat belts associated with those seats, now they've been moved, have been fastened to a secure point as part of the vehicle's construction. And that's the concern that we've got with things like seating layouts. We've also got examples of additional lights that have been fixed into vehicles that seem to just be, on first impression, hanging by, you know, a few extra wires that have been put in. So there's all those concerns about it. We don't really know whether or not how they would cope in the event of an accident, and that's the worry.
Of course, one would expect that the modifications have been carried out to a top-notch standard. But you'll never really know until one of those vehicles is involved in an accident. And if that were to happen and it was an adverse event, then quite clearly there will be a lot of the spotlight will be turned on the council as a licensing authority, hence the proposal.
Councillor Pike?
Isn't all this stuff picked up on the MOT anyway? I thought all this is normally picked up. If a vehicle goes in for an MOT, because it's the same, if people have illegal number plates on, they will not pass it until they get the correct number plates on or anything else. When they modify them, the modifications are part of the MOT, and if it's a minibus, all the seat belts and everything have to be to the manufacturer's specifications.
I think there is some concern that the actual Viva, the individual vehicle assessment, goes into more detail than the MOT does. You know, so and I think that's the issue for us, is that when we've been talking to our approved garages about this as well, you know, they have felt that they're not always in a position to be able to, you know, make a determination on some aspects of the vehicle's modifications. And that's why I think there is obviously this DVSA test that's been around for a while that is specifically aimed at looking at these issues where vehicles have been modified. So I think even our approved garages, you know, have got some issues with being able to make a determination on it, which is why we've elected to go for the Viva test.
I just add to that, Chair. I mean, I'm no expert in this area, but certainly my cursory reading of it is that it's an advance on the MOT test. The MOT, nothing stops someone buying a car pre-1975 that doesn't have seat belts and putting seat belts in it, which is similar to the situation here. What the MOT will do is test whether the seat belt is functional. It doesn't test whether or not it's been installed safely. There's an overlap in there. Similarly, what the MOT will do with a seat which tilts is to check that the tilting mechanism or the folding mechanism is functional. It wouldn't necessarily, unless it's rocking on its axis, it wouldn't necessarily fail just because there's no certainty about whether or not the way it's been welded meets the Viva standard. If it's, to all intents and purposes, rigid and it's folding, they'll pass it at the MOT. So that's not to say it has been triple spot welded or fixed to the bulkhead or whatever it is that's required. That's the difference between the two, as I understand it.
Councillor Barker?
Thank you. I go back to my previous occupation with discussing this, and a lot of these things used to come under what they used to call the construction and use regulations. And the thing is with vehicle safety, it moves on and on and on, year upon year. Something happens, and the vehicles get modified because that happens, and it continues onwards. And the trouble is with, if we don't go back to the whole of our fleet and ask for this particular issue to be sorted, you have got vehicles there that are quite old that would not comply with today's standards. We all know that. I think Olu said that in relation to what the trade will say. But when you've got a vehicle modification, and you're quite right, Paul, I mean, the stuff goes through MOT, a standard MOT. If, like Olu suggested, that you changed, I think it was Mike suggested, you change the seats round to put the seats rear-facing against the bulkhead, they might well still have to have a seatbelt legally, but that seatbelt will never work in a month of Sundays because you're facing the wrong way. What will affect that vehicle is the fact that how it's bolted to the floor, because you've got all your weight, if there's a sudden stop, going back on the back seat, and so it'll rip it out the floor, because that's not what the floor's designed for. And these are the things that this Viva sorts out, because it allows for experience in vehicle safety. I don't see how we can actually refuse to do this, because what is our job? Our job is to ensure passenger safety first and foremost. And if we've got an aged vehicle fleet, some of them won't comply with today's standards. And I'm sorry, but if they don't comply with today's standards, they should get another vehicle.
Councillor Ashburn.
What is the maximum period of time before vehicles have to be renewed, have to be retested? It's annual. Okay, when it seems to be reasonable to me to do it at the next renewal.
In that case, Chair, you've got two alternative proposals being put forward. One by Councillor Ashburner, that the test is carried out at the next renewal, and one by Councillor Hazelgrave, I believe it was, that it should be immediate. You want to take the votes on that, really? Which do you want to take first? Do you want to run that?
I think we've all agreed that it should be done. It's a question of whether it's now or at the next renewal. Does that make sense?
I do see that.
But in the interim, we can condemn an unsafe vehicle.
Yeah.
But potentially.
Yeah, but they've been doing so for yonks. But some say immediate and some I'm proposing at the next.
Chair, can I make a second the proposal where we do it as of immediate, with immediate effect, please? The proposal from Councillor Hazelgrave.
Chair, there are two proposals. The first, in the order in which they came, we would have to take Councillor Hazelgrave's first. What you would need to do, therefore, is get a seconder for that, which I think is what Councillor Pegg has just done, and then go to the vote and see if that carries. If that carries, what you then have, in effect, is Councillor Ashburner's as a contra to that, and we'd have to go through the process again to see if that gets carried, to reverse the first. So we have a proposal, and we have it seconded there. Do you want to put it to the vote, Chair?
Those in favour of a proposal from Councillor Hazelgrave? Carried. Now we'll go back to...
It's immediate.
Okay. Yep.
Right, the next section then is 417. This is headed up hybrid vehicles and luggage space. What we did as part of the consultation exercise was ask whether or not people were happy with the minimum of 300 litres luggage space available for customer use that's currently in the vehicle specification. This did create some problems for certain hybrid type vehicles because of the nature of the way they operate in terms of battery power that often ate into the luggage space. We then sort of explored a couple of different scenarios about, well, you know, in terms of private hire vehicles, you often ring and book them. For the vast majority of journeys, the luggage space in the boot is never ever used. And obviously, if you were going on a long run or going to the airport, you would stipulate that at the time of booking. So there was then this other option that we put on the table about actually do we need to specify a minimum amount of luggage space in a private hire vehicle anyway. We don't need to sort of panic too much about that. We're not then going to immediately start to license super minis as private hire vehicles because there are other specifications and requirements that would mean they didn't fulfill the right criteria anyway. So again, sorry, but we've almost offering two options for consideration with this one as well. The first one is to just simply amend down the requirement in the standard from 300 to 200 litres. The other option is to remove the condition and specification relating to a minimum amount of luggage space in its entirety. They're the two options that we've proposed here.
Councillor Pegg.
Vehicles are consistently changing, especially with the hybrids coming in. And like you've already said, Mike, majority of times when people are shopping, they're in the town, they want the private hire vehicle, it's only to go from A to B. If they want to go to the airport or somewhere else, they will specify that, and they'll say that they've got X amount of luggage or whatever the case may be, or I would hope they would say that. So I would move that we move we stick to the bottom paragraph, or remove the condition and the specifications relating to the minimum amount of luggage space for private hire vehicles in their entirety. So I would propose that if we want to move on.
Ashwin seconded. Councillor Ashwin, did you second? Yeah.
Yes, Chair, can I just put an addendum to that, really? In as much that I entirely agree with what you're saying. There are some operators now who have got an automated system, and I mean, Chad's for one of them. And I mean, basically, you don't talk to anybody. I think what's needed, if we could recommend to the trade that they actually put that into their preamble to say, if you want luggage space, you must tell us, press 1 or press 2 or whatever it is. Yeah. Because, as I say, I know with Chad particularly, all you do is, if you're at home, they'll say, you're at home, where do you want to go, blah, 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 and it's done, it's all done automatically. So you just need that facility to be able to stipulate you need luggage space, as you would with a disabled person or whatever it is. You just need that so it's a matter of the trade with these automated systems, or an operator similarly asking the same question.
I'll agree with that, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Nearly at the end now. 418 is about medicals. So, Council in November, it's already been agreed that we require existing and new drivers at their next expiry to undertake a Group 2 medical examination. So that's not up for debate tonight because that's already been approved. What this issue is about is whether or not we agree that new applicants or existing drivers arrange those tests through their own GP as an option, or whether or not we look at it as a provision of bringing this service in-house, where the medical examinations will be undertaken by the Council's Occupational Health Service. So there's two options there. Clearly, obviously, you know, a driver through or an applicant through their own GP practice would need to pay the going rate that their GP practice charges for this type of medical examination. You'll probably be aware that it's a recognised standard medical test. It's also required for other professional drivers. So there will be GP practices out there who can do the examination, who will charge a fee for it. Obviously, if option 2 is chosen, that's going to require additional resourcing of the council's occupational health service. So there's going to be an impact in terms of council resources for option 2. So there's two options: leave it with their own GP practice, or move it in-house to the council's occupational health service.
Councillor Peck?
Chair, sorry, before you open that to the floor, could I just add one or two additional points in relation to option 2? It's worth also pointing out to members, so you're aware, that in order to undertake the Group 2 medical, whoever is carrying out the assessment would need access to the subject's full medical records, which would mean that even if the occupational health team did the work, they would still need the consent of the individual to write to their doctors to access the information. their doctors may well also then charge an additional fee to do that. So again, it's in the interest of transparency, one needs to know what it is that supports the proposals on the table, and I felt it was important you knew that.
Thanks, Olu. Councillor Pike.
Thanks, Chair. I propose that we use anybody's own GP. It's going to be far more cost effective than the council trying to set it up and run it. It'll double the cost, basically, for anybody. Plus the fact that the GPs know the patient far better, all the little things, and that is the main problem. And I don't think there's any chance, or there may be, but GPs will be in very serious consequences if they did falsify anything. So I'm quite happy for it to continue to go to GPs.
Chair, sorry, okay.
I just wanted to ask for examples where officers are increasingly found they have to challenge the veracity of a number of privately sourced medical certificates. What sort of things are you talking about there?
Yes, they are, but to be fair, they do relate to our existing form being incomplete. We've had to go back to some of the doctors who have provided medicals for applicants because they've not filled the form in properly, or they've been a little bit vague, or they've left it blank. I think in most respects, we're not going to experience that moving forward, because by moving to the Group 2 medical examination, there is almost like a prescriptive form. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. My only concern is whether or not all GPs will offer the facility to do it. They've got a lot. They have a lot of assessments and things, HGV licenses, medicals after accidents, this, that, and the other. Some GPs don't do them. They say, no, you've got to go somewhere else and we'll supply your medical records. Some argue that they haven't got time or whatever. What would we do in a scenario where a GP said, no, I'm not doing it?
Unfortunately, Chair, I think there's only one answer to that. If you are a professional and you require your GP to provide you with a service and he says no, you would have to change your GP and move practice to another GP who will provide you with the service.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is the last section for consideration tonight, which starts at 419, which is all about resources. And obviously, as you read 419 there, it obviously sort of sets out that implementing all of these proposals will require an amount of investment to make the delivery of service possible, to make it robust, to make it resilient. And I think it's just acknowledging there that neither the licensing team nor the legal service, as they're currently staffed, have got the sufficient resources to meet the challenges that these changes will present. And so what we've done there in 419 is to set out the additional full-time and temporary resource that we believe is going to be required to implement the changes. And then obviously we don't need to worry too much about paragraph 4 to 420 anymore, because that was dependent on the decision that you've just made about keeping it with the GP practice. That would have only been a consideration if you'd have elected to go for the Council's Occupational Health Service. So we don't need to worry about 420. 421 really just reminds you of this fundamental principle behind licensing schemes in that they've got to be self-financing. So, you know, the money that we need to deliver the service will need to be charged and met by the trade. So the proposal in the recommendation, it's the very, very last one, 2.14, approve the additional full-time and temporary resource set out in paragraph 419 that are essential prerequisites to the successful implementation of the measures approved both by Council on the 23rd of November and also these that you've considered and agreed to tonight. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. There's 6 full-time equivalent posts there. I'd just like to seek some clarifications. What formula did we use to say that we're going to need that many staff to do all these particular things that we've already discussed?
Yeah. Okay. There are. I don't think there are 6. There are 5 full-time equivalent posts. No, that's all right. The last one I was just going to sort of pick up on. That is a fixed-term contract post. So that is a temporary post. The idea of that post is to cover between, in effect, between now, when these changes implemented from the end of June, beginning of July 2017, and then we'll run for a further year. So it's just important to recognise that is a temporary fixed term post. In terms of the licensing staff, because I can only talk for the licensing staff, Olu might talk around the lawyer post that's been identified. I think what's important to recognise is that the licensing team have lost 2 staff recently. You know, the establishment that was the licensing team was reduced probably within the last 12 or 18 months. So we've lost 2 staff there. There is going to be significant additional work if the changes were agreed and are introduced, which is obviously what's happened. So we are going to need both some front office staff in terms of the licensing officer, because part and parcel of their role is to service the counter at the council house on a bit of a rota basis with the other 2 licensing officers that we currently have. The licensing administrator post is primarily there to do some of the work around the penalty points scheme and start looking at collating some of that information together to determine what action that we need to take in respect of individual applicants. We did have a licensing administrator post previously that was solely or primarily employed to put together some of the committee reports. That was one of the posts that went along with a licensing officer post. The apprentice post is really just about development and future-proofing the officers that work in the licensing team. What we have found is that recruitment to the licensing posts is not that easy. Not if we want somebody who has got some previous experience of licensing work. So the apprentice post there is an opportunity for us to take on an apprentice, to train up an apprentice, and almost have a member of staff that we wouldn't ordinarily have to be paying a full the full wage to. So rather than paying an £18,000 a year post, we can pay £8,500 for an apprentice, but also get a young person into the into the licensing world, if you like. The licensing policy officer really is to start work and progress and help Sandra and Anne, principally, the sort of two senior officers in the licensing team, to help them develop the necessary sort of documentation that needs to sit behind all of these new process and procedures that we've introduced. So that's we've also got a number of sort of additional auditing checks for the various processes that we need to be doing now. So, checking DBS statuses, looking at DVLA records for people's licensing records. It's all additional work that, as I say, we need some extra resource to deliver.
My supplementary concern then is, well, not concern, this question is, it's talking about being funded out of surpluses, profits. So do we have, because there's about £130,000 worth of salary there, do we have those surpluses, profits?
Well, we don't have ongoing surpluses, no. I mean, what we have to do, of course, is at the end of each year, when we are determining the fees and charges for the following period, we have to take into account any surpluses or deficits that we've got, because it's a ring-fence budget. We can't carry forward, or we can't utilise those resources elsewhere in the organisation. So, in effect, when we've got a surplus, we use that as a subsidy for the previous year. And it may well be that if we've got a subsidy, if we've got a surplus for this year, we can utilise some of those funds some of those surpluses to fund those posts for the rest of this year. But the downside of that is that if we're running on a deficit, we almost have to carry that forward into the following year, and we have to recover that from the license fees and charges that we're making in the following year. So fees and charges, as we know, often go up and down depending on a number of different factors. It isn't an exact science, but where we have surpluses at the end of a year, we can utilise that to subsidise the licence fees and charges for the following year. Yeah, it's not easy.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So,
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I think the starting point to justifying the one post of a lawyer is to understand that with the reduction in our finances since 2010, we have gone down in personnel numbers from 39 FTEs in legal to 23. And the net effect of that, where it comes to a regulatory perspective, is that there is only one lawyer currently who deals with licensing, Lucy, who you know. Now, we also need to bear in mind that Lucy doesn't deal with just licensing. She deals with all other regulatory functions across the organization. So that's the starting point. When you then look at studies and contact we've made with other local authorities who've introduced points-based systems, for example, Leicester, what has become pretty apparent is that there has been an exponential rise in the demand for legal support and advice, both in terms of the implementation of the point system, because of course that is something which officers administratively day to day will be seeking advice on. So there's that element. There's ongoing licensing advice to officers, which they'll require. Leicester in particular were at pains to point out that in terms of appeals, they saw something like 350% increase in the number of appeals that went through to the magistrates' court, and only the lawyers could deal with that. and only a lawyer with rights of audience can necessarily deal with that as well. £52,000 on its own is a lot of money, but it's worth making the point that that includes all of the on-costs that go with it as well.
Councillor Poulter?
Yes, Chair, thanks. A number of points here for me. The first one is to acknowledge the fact that we had a late report saying we can't work out how much we're going to charge yet until we know everything we're going to do. But along the way, I've noted a number of ways in which face-to-face contact with drivers and counter work is going to be reduced, like the online application forms, for example, the counter-signing of the DBSs, and other small ways in which counter contact with drivers should be reduced. And after that, in terms of, I certainly remember a lot of discussion about the potential for a points-based system, and it being uttered that there would be no significant extra resources required to deal with a points-based system. It seems that that's changed, certainly in relation to the lawyer's situation, and one or two other ways. So that's of serious concern to me. After that, I too have been doing practicing my level 1 maths. And if you take out the temporary role, the first 4 roles there are full-time permanent roles, and they add up to over £100,000 a year. And I don't think it's far off, you took it that we have around 1,000 licence holders. Is that right, Mike, roughly?
We've got drivers, we've got vehicles, we've got operators.
So how many in total? Well, say if it was around 1,000, my basic maths, that equates to about £100 a year for each licence holder. They only currently pay £100. If a licence holder has got a licence now for 3 years, whenever it comes up for renewal, you potentially could have a licence fee of £400.
Yeah, we've got about 1,300 drivers, just under 1,300.
But it's
drivers.
potentially more than that anyway. So
Yeah.
on a basic, if you're looking for a rough guide now, you'd be looking at around £100 a month increase on the licence fee, because it's the licence a year, sorry, £100 a year, and that's not insignificant. Is my maths sort of rightish?
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, in terms of you totting it up, you're right. It's 103.5k without including the temporary post. I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than that, of course, because of the way that we now have to calculate the fees and charges, as you will all know, because we've done it a couple of times since since there was the Hemming case that changed. So we have to account for the amount of time we spend in each of the licence areas. So it may well actually be that drivers pay a little bit more of a proportion of it because we have to spend more time dealing with their applications than we do drivers, than we do vehicles or we do proprietors.
So it could be £120 a year for drivers and £80 for what's it?
Yes. I mean,
either way, it's a significant increase, isn't it?
It's not
a massive increase, science, in fact. It's potentially 4 times as much as roughly they're paying now. Yeah. I mean, if there's no response to that, I just think it's something we need to flag up. I think it's an important point that needs to be borne in mind and some thought put to it, because it would certainly get some in the interest of the trade, I think, if that was the case when we come to look at the fees.
I mean, we're not going to agree these tomorrow, and obviously set them out. We've already said, haven't we, that we've agreed that we need to retain the existing licence fees and charges for until the end of June, beginning of July. We do have an opportunity now that we've we've been through this document. We now know the direction that we need to go in. We need to put all of these things that you've agreed tonight now in with the mix of all of the other changes that were approved at full council back in November. So we're a bit more clearer now on what you've agreed to and what you haven't agreed to. So,
Chair, but the problem with that is that there's not much that we've taken out other than a little bit of face-to-face contact at the counter. Everything else is still there, and you've set your fees on that previously. All this extra stuff and all this extra staffing resource money will have to come out of the licence fees that we collect.
That's why you Councillor Porter? No.
Right, so we currently have Sandra, Anne, we have an enforcement officer, and we have 3 licensing officer posts. So 3, one of them is vacant at the moment. So on the establishment, we have 3, 4, 5, 6 FTEs. So you've got 6? Yeah. So essentially you're talking about... Yeah, now those 6 FTEs that we've got aren't solely on taxi licensing. We also deliver the general licensing work as well. So that's all the Licensing Act, alcohol, the gambling, the other, licenses that you get to know about at the training. So it's not, that entire resource is not. Yes, essentially that's what we're saying. These extra resources will be...
Chair, I think at the very least, and probably before we come with the fees recommendations, the committee is going to need to see a breakdown, in effect, a business plan as to why these extra staff members are needed and what of the extra conditions it is that's added to the time and if it's 4.14, 4.1, if that amounts to, we need to understand how, and likewise with the legal side of things, we need to understand how it's going to take that much more resource to fund, because it's going to have massive implications in relation to the fees.
Licensing policy officer and the lawyer. I think at the present time, we also have a lawyer present on our subcommittees that puts their time in. So how many hours extra would a lawyer have to put in with the new system? And the licensing administration officer. We've got licensing officer, then we've got licensing administration officer at 18,000. So the total cost is about 138,500. So that's going to be going on to the trade and on to the customer. Yeah, so I think, like Councillor Porter says, that we need some sort of a breakdown how that's going to be spread over to the trade, and how many extra hours are going to be involved with the new system. Because if it wasn't the new system, the subcommittees of the old, then we would want that officers coming from the budget of the local authority.
Chair, I can certainly answer the question insofar as it relates to the lawyer post. And I thought I had done in what I said. There's no guesstimates necessarily here. What we've done is benchmarked against other authorities that have introduced exactly the same system and the level of additional work which it generated for the legal service. And that benchmark, as I said, was with Leicester City Council and the percentage increase in licensing work alone. And I stress, bearing in mind there's only one officer currently that deals with licensing work and other regulatory work across the organization. In licensing alone, there was an exponential increase by 350%. However, I quite take the point, and it's a very serious point, which the members are making, that the costs will rise. And I think it's right that you should challenge the figures and necessarily perhaps understand better what is informing them.
Councillor Hazelgrave.
Chair, I think we've got to bear in mind that we're moving to an officer-led system, which is much more resilient and robust. So we're fulfilling our statutory duty in a much more profound and significant way. You can't make bricks without straw. That's going to cost more because there's obviously going to be more officer involvement in decision making, making sure that there's consistent decisions, etc. So in principle, the cost is going to go up. We have, I believe, until July before some of these posts needs to be in existence. So it's not a full year that they need to be in place. I assume that they can start work in July when the new system starts. They don't need to be in post in April, for example. So it's not a full annual, it's not an annual amount from July to April. So that reduces the amount to a certain extent, actually by how many months? 4 months. The permanent post after that, but on an annual basis, and there will be higher in the following years, but we will maybe need to come back to this, I think, when clearer indications can be made about what we need to provide in terms of extra personnel. I think we need more work to be done to reassure us, but I think in principle, more money will have to be spent on posts to fulfil the thing we're setting up. Otherwise, we're setting it up to fail. And then where will we be reputationally with the trade? If they're waiting weeks for this, that and the other to happen, etc., it would be a disaster.
Councillor Barker.
Yeah, here we are. This is the truth of the matter, isn't it? The full council were told, quite clear, and we were told, that this new system would be easily put in place, it would be resilient, it would be robust. And now we've got Olu telling us that the Leicester system, which I questioned from the outset, has brought about a 350% increase in work for the lawyers because of appeals, etc., etc. This is the truth of it. We've signed up to a deal on the basis that it was going to be more resilient, more robust, it wasn't going to cost us anything, we could cope with it. There's the truth. We can't.
Councillor Raju.
Chair, I don't think we're going to reach some kind of consensus on this tonight, and I'm just going to echo what Councillor Poulter has said, in that we do need to see a business case. And I'm not at all saying that these posts aren't needed. I'm saying that I just want to see income and expenditure. And at the end of the day, I don't want to victimise taxi drivers, because if we're going to increase charges for them, we're going to say buy yourself new uniforms, you're going to do A, B and C. The cost gets, with this local authority is not going to be very popular. Thank you. So that's all I was going to say.
Councillor Pegg.
Yes, my expectation from as soon as we heard these proposals was that it would have to double charges. That's been obvious for a long time. We've chosen this luxury service which doesn't use officers, doesn't use councillors, uses paid officers. We'll have to either we continue or we stop it. Thank you.
I was just going to say, if it helps, I think Councillor Raju is right. It's very, very difficult, I think, to get to a consensus on this evening. Perhaps what we do then as officers is to go away and provide more information in relation to a business case that we bring to, well, the next scheduled meeting, which will be in March. Yeah.
Thank you.
Chair, I don't know whether it's appropriate at this stage before we sort of close down this part of the meeting, because we've given quite a few tasks along the way to this working party. Is it the opportune moment, if you will allow it, for me to sort of probably give them 2 more tasks to look at again aspects of out-of-town taxes, and I relate specifically to some information that has come to me in relation to some of the out-of-town taxes that have actually been stopped in exercises within Derby, and some of the evidence of the concerns which we've raised all the way through that we really ought to look at to see whether or not we can actually button down even more what we're going to do about them. If that makes sense, I just think it needs to go to the subcommittee to actually, in fact, see what we can. We've sent letters to the ministers. We've not had a reply. We've now got some evidence where we could actually look at something else.
Yes, Your Honor, we haven't received any response from them, but I will send a reminder to them, right? After that, we make a decision. So I'll send a reminder to them.
But there is probably some further information we can go to actually justify our concerns that have gone to London, and probably offer them.
And I will send them a reminder,
Yeah.
then wait for a couple of weeks, then we will talk about this, next meeting.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Chair. Good evening. From the 1st of December 2016, the Immigration Act 2016 amended licensing regimes to prevent illegal working in all private hire and taxi trade. The Act prohibits the local authorities from issuing anyone who is disqualified by reason of their immigration status to have a licence. The licensing authority discharges their duties by requiring very specific documentation from applicants at renewal or application to extend any licence. Time-limited permissions means that the licensing team will have to repeat those checks at subsequent applications. The Act also adds immigration offences and penalties to the list of grounds licence can be suspended or revoked. The licensing team have introduced controls to ensure satisfactory checks are undertaken. Nobody will be exempted from that process. If the licensing team are unable to determine an application on immigration status, it will have to be referred to the Home Office for confirmation / clarification before that licence can be issued. The recommendation is to note the report in order to provide assurances to the Licensing Committee that the licensing team are discharging their functions under the Immigration Act. Thank you.
Chair, one important point which I just need to make as a result of that report is just to stress to members one key event which the new legislation introduces, and it's this, that in relation to licensing decisions, which in effect this is what this will be, the standard has always been either that there's a referral to a committee, or if it's within the scope of delegations to officers, then it goes straight on appeal to a magistrate's court. What this legislation clearly says is that if the subject is unhappy with the decision of the local authority, the appeal is straight, direct to the Home Office.
Thank you, Chair. Come on. Sorry.
Item number 7, licensing function audit reports.
Thank you, Chair. The Central Midlands Audit Partnership have undertaken an audit to identify the appropriateness and adequacy of controls in place within the licensing team. Controls were identified as reasonable and the procedures to issue licences were robust. Most areas reviewed were adequately controlled with risks generally managed. Some systems required improvement of internal controls. 7 areas of improvement were identified and they were considered as low risk. All control measures were accepted by the team and positive actions have already been taken in 6 of those cases, with the remaining case having positive action agreed. A summary of the issues and the action is at Appendix 2 of the report for information. The recommendation is to note the report to provide reassurances to the Licensing Committee that the licensing functions do not raise any significant risks to the authority. Thank you.
Pardon? Note the report. All agreed? Thank you very much. Meeting finished. Very short meeting. Thank you very much.